The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.
And you're very welcome to the RTÉ Rugby Podcast as we look back on the last 16 of the Champions Cup just gone. We'll also look ahead to Friday night rugby this weekend, URC back, and we have a interprovincial derby on Saturday. Friday night to look forward to at Ravenhill, plus the Women's Six Nations kicks on as well as Ireland go to England. Maybe the less said about that, the better, in the company of Neil Treacy, Donal, Lenihan and Fiona Hayes. You're all very welcome, guys. Look, we'll get straight into it. Donal, before we get into the matches as such at the weekend, and lots to talk about there, just your overall thoughts on the two-legged nature of the last 16. Do you think as a concept that it was worth embracing, and do you think it worked?
Yeah, I did. I have to say, I thought it added something novel, something that we're not used to in rugby. And when you look at the games, I watched a lot of the games over the 2 weekends. It forced teams to play to the death. Teams, you look at Harlequins in Montpellier, they were 34-0 down a half an hour into the game. At any other stage, you'd think, well, look, they might start concentrating on the Premiership, but they kept playing. They brought it within 14 points, and as a consequence of that, it meant that their game back in the Stoop was alive. We saw that all over the place. You look at Toulouse against Ulster away. 14 men for 70 minutes in the game. Ulster in control. Was it 13 points up with a minute to go? Toulouse kept playing. In other times, that might not have happened if it was a knockout game. So from that point of view, yeah, I thought it was outstanding. I know it's a bit kind of clumsy in some degree, but originally it was brought in for the quarterfinal stage. When the concept came up first, it was brought in for quarterfinals, but because of the COVID and the necessity to kind of get more teams out of the pool stage, when they created this round of 16, it was then decided to have it at that stage of the tournament. I think, going from 24 teams to 16 teams, there's still too much deadwood floating around. I think I'd persist with the concept, but I'd bring it back next year for the quarterfinals, because right. You know yourself, you can be unlucky the way things work out in the pool stage. At least by having the home and away leg in Europe, it does give you a sort of a second go at it. I would persist with the higher ranking team having the second game at home. So therefore, you have that incentive as Munster had, when they were beaten in Exeter. It was all about keeping the margin of defeat in Sandy Park as narrow as possible, because you felt bringing any team back to Thomond Park, you'd have a great chance of closing that gap. So overall, I think it's worth persisting with, but I would suggest bring it in a quarterfinal stage.
What did you think, Fiona, overall? Did you enjoy it?
Loved it. Thought it was brilliant. New edition. Every game nearly was alive when it came to the second leg. I watched that Bristol Sale game. The first game, I nearly fell asleep. It was so boring that scoreline was horrific. But then we saw what a cracker the next game. So it gave the two sides a chance to put on a real show. And I just thought it was brilliant for the game. And as we saw, the narrow margins, we saw poor Ulster with Toulouse, but it just made for cracking games. Now the lads' bodies mightn't feel like they loved it 2 weeks in a row, but for the spectator, It was brilliant.
It was. Neil Treacy's so happy with Munster's result. He's on the cans of Guinness at 10 a.m. in the morning. Are you drinking Guinness there? What's in that cup there?
Oh, that's coffee, don't worry. That's
coffee. You're sure? Coffee, right, okay, grand. I have a bad reputation. I think you're going to outdo me if you're on the Guinness at 10 in the morning. But look, I was laughing at Neil. I was laughing at Stephen Jones. I generally tend to laugh at Stephen Jones when he puts up these tweets, but he put up on, I think, when it was Friday, when Montpellier named their team, that this is an absolute disgrace and they're just throwing away the competition in favour of the top 14, and then Montpellier go out and do what they did to Harlequins. I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, I remember seeing those on Friday afternoon as well, and straight away you're just thinking, there's only one way these can age, and in the end it turned like milk. But I'd go along with what Fiona and Donal were saying. I thought the two-legged nature, like, it really, really added to not all the games. Obviously, there were a couple that ended up in blowouts like Leinster and Connacht, and you had Sale and Bristol on Friday night was absolutely brilliant, and just constantly back and forth. Ulster and Toulouse, like 50-49 across 2 legs. Like, it's just unbearably close, even being in Thomond Park on Saturday afternoon as well. And during the second half, when Exeter had kind of gone back in front over the 2 legs, even though when you look at the scoreline, Munster were 26-10 winners on the day. Like, it's a 16-point win. In theory, that's a relatively comfortable success. But my only memory of that second half was that there was unbearable tension across Thomond Park. Like, it was absolutely unbearable. The only thing I would say is that there has to be a kind of there's to be a lot of thought now over the next few months as to if they do want to persist with this next season, what way do they do it?
Do you think they will?
It's really tough to figure out, because as good as it was, and I know Donal was saying as well, you'd rather have it at a quarter-final stage, which I'd agree with as well. But the problem as well is you have to find that extra weekend somewhere to fit it in, because if they were to do it the same as they did this year, the problem is, like, if we think back to December and January, the pool stages were pretty bad this year. It was a tough go watching that across those 4 rounds, when a lot of teams were, phoning it in after 1 or 2 games, to be totally honest. You had a lot to wade through to get to these brilliant last 16 games. So I think they really need to figure out, what do they want to prioritize? Do they want to have a better tournament the whole way through, or do they want more drama once you hit the knockout stage?
That's it. And
Go
on. Yeah.
Sorry, I think a lot of that, Donal, was due to the fact that you had 24 teams in it. And then, when you have just the 4 pool games, a lot of them are gone. Like there was no Welsh team, for example, made even the last 16. I mean, they're so off the radar at the moment. It's quite embarrassing for them. But I personally, I think the competition needs to go back to 20, keep the quality there, and build from there. I accept what you're saying about trying to build in an extra match, but look, if you go back to the 4 and then you go the quarterfinal. You go back to 20 teams and have the quarterfinal on the home and away leg. Yeah, I think you can build around it that way.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to find necessarily an extra week then. And if you think as well, the group stage, this year, Fiona, I think Neil is right. You don't want to be in a situation where you're almost like Champions League level, where nobody cares about the group stage. It's only when you get to the knockout draw that people start paying attention. And I think this year, like, you had Montpellier, who were hammered in their first match. They got the gift of the 4-point bonus and 5-point bonus points by the Leinster not showing up. And then they managed to win 1 game, I think, and they get to... Anyway, look, the point was that it was a bit of a shambles, the pool stage, and you wouldn't want to see that, I don't think, for the next few seasons, would you?
No, it wasn't enjoyable, some of the games near the end. I know COVID interfered with a lot of fixtures and that, when people were getting points here and there, but it was a bit of a shambles, as Neil said. There was just, people playing 1 game, they knew that they'd get points for the next game and going through and sailing through. And that meant it, when we get to this stage of the competition, now we're looking at home and away fixtures that are based off kind of people getting gifted points as well. So look, you can't stop what happened there, but I think definitely going forward it needs to be the shorter teams. That's always worked, and even that home and away, like, build that in somewhere now, quarterfinal, semi-final, wherever it is, but definitely got people standing and cheering and really kind of shook up the tournament as it was.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll just take some of the key points again from the matches, right, involving the Irish provinces. We'll start with Leinster, Connacht, Donal. A key moment in the game, and I don't like to pin it on him, but it certainly was for me watching when Jack Carty stepped up to take that penalty after Connacht had made a really good start to the game, and he pushed it left and wide, and I just went, oh Christ, is this a sign of things to come? Because I wanted a competitive game more than anything else. After that, Leinster just seemed to flick into gear, and they never looked back, really, did they?
No, they didn't. It was I was at the game, the Connacht Leinster game, the first round in Galway, which was a fantastic game. Connacht got that try, the Porch try, after 2 or 3 minutes. You could see Leinster were struggling to integrate their internationals back. The quality of Connacht's attacking game was incredible. Brilliant game. But look, to be fair, Carty, he missed a kick that he should have got. And I mean, that is the one small question mark around Jack Carty in terms of international level, key place kicks like that. We've seen that happen in the past. But look, at the time I felt, oh God, look, you've got to take every point against Leinster. That would have put them 6-0 up. But I think it was an irrelevance, really. I mean, Leinster were so good. They were so competent over the entire remaining 75 minutes that had he got the kick, it was only a kind of a stay of execution, if you like.
What you're saying to me is, I've written down, it's all Jack Carty's fault. That's not right. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of your usual rants that's way over the top. That's completely and utterly irrelevant as always. Yeah. But look, I thought Leinster, I mean, they were so clinical, and the way they finished, they just kind of ratcheted up through the gears. And they're in a position, I mean, in Galway, I was talking to one of the Leinster backroom people, and they were saying, look, the internationals coming back off the Six Nations, they were knackered, and they were, it was difficult trying to transit them in. We've seen now, as a consequence of that, Leo Cullen has taken the decision to leave the vast majority of them at home, not bringing them to South Africa for the 2 URC games. So, and I think Cullen, more than anyone, when you consider the couple of years that he had in Leicester Tigers in Welford Road, he will be conscious. With Leinster over the years, games are pretty easy to predict. Let's be honest about it. You see them winning the vast majority. Now, I still think they'll win in Welford Road, but there's a contest in that game. It's sort of the old rising, a sleeping giant has been awakened by Steve Bardwick there in Welford Road. They will love nothing better than Leinster with all their internationals coming over. But Cullen, I mean, you couldn't get a better guy. And to be fair, Stuart Lancaster knows the English system better than most. That's going to be a cracking quarterfinal. And to be fair to EPCR, we've given them a bit of stick over the years in terms of the way the competition changed from ERC, EPCR. They went down the road of, they thought they'd generate millions, which hasn't happened. And the tournament is in a sort of a holding stage, if you like. But to get to where we are, like the quarterfinals, the 4 quarterfinals that we have are all going to be incredibly competitive. So maybe with the exception of Montpellier, who you mentioned kind of snuck in the back door, have been hammered in 2 of their 3 pool games that they played. I think you've got practically, you've nearly all the best teams in the tournament, which is what you want. So it's a good result overall.
Neil, do you think Leinster have the steel to go all the way this year? And by steel, I guess I'm saying power. They have the power up front when they meet a Toulouse, when they meet a Racing, when they meet a La Rochelle. I don't know necessarily if they'll meet it against Leicester, despite how well Leicester are playing. But when they come up against those big French units, so they have the power, do you think, to get past what they couldn't get past over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I do think they have it. I think particularly as well, the fact this year as well that you're going to have a front row of Andrew Porter, Tyke Furlong and Ronan Keller makes a massive difference as well. And also then Dan Sheehan is a year further down the line. I think you're still looking at their second row maybe and thinking they need that big bulky lock in there, which is something they're trying to get next season with Jason Jenkins. But I think the difference they've made in between last season and this season is that their front row in particular is a bit beefier. It's a bit stronger. It's a bit more powerful just with carries and tackles and things like that and meeting people at the gain line. So I think that's the difference they probably have made in the last 12 months. It's probably going to be, you think they will be thereabouts. They're certainly good enough to do it. I think a lot of us, I'd certainly be thinking most likely outcome a Leinster Racing 92 final. If I was to be trying to predict the whole way through, I absolutely think they have enough to go all the way. And if they do lose, I don't necessarily think it's going to be just because of power. It might just be someone better beats them on the day,
You're nodding your head there, Fiona. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think they've like Cullen has spent the year. I suppose he's looked at that, from last year's game. It probably haunts him. So I think it's an area I've definitely seen improvement. But I think it's the footwork around the contact area. He's really improved in the forwards and especially the big ball carriers. So Neil talked about gain line. They're getting gain line because you can see when they hit that there's a lot more footwork and they're a lot more clinical around that area. So you're not going to beef up massively, I suppose, in a year. And he seems to be happy enough with his squad. I know we're looking at the Jenkins coming. He wants that big prop behind, or that big tight head lock behind, a big beefier guy, and I can see that. But I feel like they could go all the way this year. I think they've looked at certain areas and it's somewhere he's focusing off, and especially we see with the squad going to South Africa, it's what he wants, it's what the whole management team wants, and I think they can beat that bulk.
Okay, what did you make of Munster on Saturday then, Fiona? I have to say, hands out here, I thought they'd be walloped at Sandy Park, so I was very surprised that they managed to keep the score within the line that they did. And I still thought they'd lose, given they were missing Tyke Byrne, given they were missing Coombs, Dave Kilcoyne. I still thought they'd lose, but they definitely are playing a better brand of rugby at the moment, and they seem a lot happier out on the pitch with the brand they're playing. I'm not all convinced that it's all down to Johan van Graan. In fact, I think maybe the opposite there, but that's something for another day. But definitely Munster look a better side in the last 3 or 4 weeks than we've seen in the last 4 years.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the biggest thing I've seen a shift in is defensively. I think they were absolutely outstanding in both legs of the tie. I know we've questioned attack wise. I thought their launch plays off set piece went really well. They really hit the areas they wanted to have. Probably didn't get Zebo as much ball as the crowd want to see. But I have to say, I was at the game and it's been a long time since I've seen Thomond Park like that. It was absolutely hopping. I was in the middle of the terrace and it was just absolutely brilliant. And I think that added to it. And we saw, players stand up. Peter O'Mahony was absolutely outstanding. I thought Dealande had a great game. Jack O'Donoghue, I talk about him every week. I watch him play. He's just immense. And I think they really took that level up. And Joey Carberry, who's a guy who's gotten stick as well. We haven't said he's performed well at Munster. He really took the reins and he was the orchestra. You know, we talk about Johnny Sexton. I thought he was absolutely brilliant and his kicking was outstanding. So I think they've taken what they've been said on board. We saw round 3, the last game, they got an absolute, I won't curse, but they got told what to do at halftime over an extra. And I think you can see that the players are standing up and they know they're not happy with the style of rugby that they're playing. And we saw a different team in the last game, especially. I think we saw a real character, heart, but execution in areas as well. And that was a big thing for me.
Have you noticed a big shift, Donal? I think there has been a shift.
Yeah, look, I think there has been a shift in mindset, really. But before that, I just wondering, had the camera shifted to Fiona on the terrace there as opposed to Jack Noel in the stands and he's stuck in his bottle of Corona, what would we have seen from
a lunatic swinging out of the rafters?
Fiona,
I'd say.
No comment.
I think you go back 2 or 3 weeks ago, for the first time, you saw publicly the cracks beginning to appear when, you know, Peter O'Mahony kind of did admit in a press conference, yes, it's not ideal that we don't know what's happening. The fact that you have some clarity around that is a huge plus. I think Munster did incredibly well to come back from Sandy Park only 5 points down. Let's be honest, they could have been 20 behind at half time. Yeah. I mean, the defensive goal line stands, and you had Johnny Gray held up over the line by somebody else. They were all key factors. So, but look, that's desire. I mean, that's something, you know, I must say, I got a little bit annoyed when Van Gran came out after the game in Exeter and he was talking about, you know, we have heart and we have steel and we play to the death and it's stand up and fight. They're things we've had for 100 years. Go back and look at the tourists coming in 1905 and the same thing happened.
Van Gran not bring that in on his own, no? Is that not his idea?
No, but you got, you know, just the technical aspects of it. That's what I want to see at it. Look, I always felt Munster had it in them to overturn that 5 points deficit. Had it been 15 points, it's a different scenario because Munster have been finding it difficult to score tries. But the other element you have to take into consideration, and let's be realistic because that's our job, and you're looking at what's ahead of them with Toulouse and potentially Leinster in a semi-final. Exeter Chiefs are nowhere near the team that did the double 2 years ago. The change in the law, the latching close in terms of their ability to convert pressure in the 22 to points, that's not there anymore. Also factor in, and yes, absolutely right to highlight the fact that Tyburn in particular, Dave Kilcoyne, Munster were missing a few, but they were missing 3 British and Irish Lions up front in Luke Cowan, Dickey, Johnny Hill, Sam Simmons crying off, and then you Jack Noel. So you've got to factor all those things. Yeah. In those circumstances, I fully expected Munster to advance to the quarterfinal. So from that point of view, no, I wasn't surprised. I think they're in a good place now, but they have a very tough game. I know we talk about it coming down the line. Ulster Friday night is a huge game in the context of them trying to get that home quarterfinal and a potential semi-final in the URC. There is a massive desire within that group just to, I suppose, maximize the strengths that they have and the quality that they have within the group. I've been critical over the last 6 months that the likes of Candellen and Hodnett haven't been given the opportunities that they deserve. I remember interviewing Jack O'Donoghue for the Munster Academy. I think he was the last fella that I was involved in that we brought in. And I always saw Jack as a number 8. And I think he was back in his best position. You know, he is literally the jack of all trades. He plays 6. He's a 7, but he's not an out-and-out 7. Yeah. He's a brilliant line-out operator. And I think, you know, on his performances this year, he deserves to start in that back row somewhere.
What about Hodnett as well, Donal? The compliment that O'Mahony and Hodnett and O'Donoghue seem to, like the cohesion with which they seem to work around the pitch, I think is almost Munster's best. And I don't want to, obviously Coombs is a fantastic player, but there just seems to be something about that back row when they work together that Munster look very dangerous.
Yeah, but look, I think there's an issue with the English teams. The Premiership isn't sort of refereed the way the breakdown. It's almost as if the opposition allow you. They're not as competitive on the deck in the Premiership. And like Exeter knew what was coming. Certainly they knew what was coming in Thomond Park after what happened the previous week, because again, I thought Hodnett and O'Donoghue were outstanding in Sandy Park. Peter O'Mahony gave his best performance in years. And you could see, you know, Peter, when you see Peter beforehand and you have the vacant stare when he's walking around the pitch, yeah, you know, somebody's in trouble today. But, you know, he was outstanding. It was exactly what Munster needed at that point in terms of their key players to stand up. Listen, I'm watching Hodnett. We covered him with the Irish 20s when they won that Grand Slam. I've seen him play for UCC over the years. He does that week in, week out. But, you know, it's all about balance. And you'll need Coombs. Depends who you're playing in a semi-final. If they get to a semi-final, or even against Toulouse, I'm not sure if he's in the running for that, but he is a physical presence. He is a ball-carrying threat that the likes of Peter doesn't have, let's say, or Jack O'Donoghue to a lesser degree. So it's all about getting the mix right. It's all about starting well. It's all about controlling the game line. Then you filter those other fellas in. But the bottom line is, and this is why I would have been most critical of Munster this year, I believe they have a very strong squad, that they a lot of the performances weren't reflecting the quality of the players that are there. I think we're now getting to a point where we're seeing that, with the exception, and Fiona alluded to it there, like Simon Zeba got one decent pass in the whole game. And
he touched the ball twice, Donal. He touched the ball twice, one of which set up that incredible try.
He didn't even get a decent pass. He had so much work to do when he got that ball out wide. You know, the pass got deflected, it was behind him.
At least it's better. And going back a long time now, the Munster game, you probably didn't know Munster beat the All Blacks in 1978. They told nobody about it.
78.
Oh, God.
Was there cameras there? We haven't seen that about
that. My good friend Mosfin was on the wing that day. And we often talk about it. The only time he says, the only time I've touched the ball against the All Blacks, 3 times I handed it to Pa Whelan to throw it into the line out. So, I mean, when you compare that, Simon Zeba got 2 passes. What's he giving out about? We've come a long way since 78.
But okay, well then Neil, just moving on a little bit, just before we move on to Ulster then. You know, if you're looking at this Friday night, even with Ulster as well, and even against Toulouse, like, you know, does Craig Casey have to come in for consideration for a start, or would you be happy enough that Conor Murray, you know, because he's started the last couple of games, the Munster have come through the tie, deserves to go again? And the reason I ask is that there's just a notable injection of pace when Casey comes on at scrum half. Is that one of Munster's strengths, that they can bring him off the bench and kind of increase the tempo when they need to? Or is there a serious case that he should start the match?
There probably is serious consideration he starts. And I think it's actually quite likely as well. I was on Johan van Grant's press conference there yesterday, and he kind of hinted that at some point over these next 2 weeks, he probably will have to be rotating in and out as internationals, given, you know, just kind of managing minutes and things like that.
Hopefully not Friday night, though, against Ulster. I mean, surely that's a full-strength team.
You know, if he has to be taking out internationals for that game, where Munster, in theory, depending on the result, Munster could finish the weekend anywhere from 2nd to 8th in the table, which is just incredible. And to be honest, it's exactly what the URC needed to have a top 8 as tightly bunched as that. But that's a different point anyway. But on Murray and Casey, I think you can actually kind of just pick and choose your games with the two of them at this stage in a kind of a horses for courses way. Do you want that kind of injection of pace from Casey from the start, or do you want a game manager on early to get you into a good position and then unleash someone like Craig Casey in the last 20 minutes? I think it worked quite well over the last 2 weeks, where you're playing a team like Exeter. You probably wanted that bit of game management from Murray, and in that final quarter, Casey came on and he was absolutely brilliant as well. I think Murray I don't think he had his best game last week, but I think in the first leg at Sandy Park, he was himself and Jack O'Donoghue were probably the 2, you know, standout players from a Munster point of view, particularly in defence for Murray. I think if I was to be picking the team myself, I think this week I might still just go along with Murray for that first half, 55, 60 minutes, and then get Casey on at the end, you know, get a bit of injection into the game. I think with the way Ulster play, a lot of physicality, you know, they've an outstanding maul, and I think having someone like Conor Murray just behind that, just kind of dictating things a little bit and controlling things in defence might just be a bit preferable. And then, you know, be with Ulster for most of the game and then get that bit of pace injected at the end.
You'd really hope, though, that Van Gran, puts out his strongest available team on Friday night for a massive Interpro up in Belfast. Fiona, after Ulster, the disappointment of Toulouse, it was there. You mentioned Thomond Park, the atmosphere there. I couldn't hear myself think in Kingspan Stadium, such was the level of noise created. The Ulster fans wholly convinced that Ulster were going to do it. They'll never have a better chance. They should have done it. And look, I'm sure Dan McFarland at the end will say, look, we blew it. We blew a massive opportunity.
Definitely. I thought I really backed them to win this one. I know Kingspan is hopping. They've got back that atmosphere. Definitely this year. It's been amazing. No one's coming away with wins up there. And I thought they played really well. I know they had the yellow early, both teams had it. And I thought they kind of controlled the game earlier on. But just when it got into that second half, a few things went awry. I know the Tom O'Toole red obviously was a massive impact on the game. I thought they should have maybe taken a kick earlier in the game as well for post. But these are things you look back and you say, at that time obviously that you weren't feeling it, but it was a game. He said they have to have a beer, cry, and get over it and move on. And I think he's correct because it was they played really well at times. McElroy was outstanding. Burns actually had a really good game as well, but it just, you had Toulouse on the ropes and they didn't put them away. And I think it'll go back to the first leg is when they really should have put that to bed, I think.
They should have, Donal. And look, the only way to beat Toulouse really, I think, is just to starve them of possession. Ulster did a really good job of that away in France, ironically, and they just didn't do as good a job. Toulouse made a lot of mistakes on the night on Saturday night. They dropped a lot of passes that you just don't see. Even like their key halfbacks just weren't as good as they normally are, as tight as they normally are. And Ulster just could not take advantage of the situation, which I'm sure Dan McFarland is hugely frustrated by.
Well, Ulster have been down this road a number of times before. I mean, they've just managed to sort of mess things up. And they have to recognise, number one, rugby is an 80-minute game. You go back to Toulouse. I mean, the fact that they're 13 points up with 3 minutes to go, and they still, out of nothing, Intermac scores a try. I mean, we know that that's what Toulouse are capable of. But I mean, could you see Leinster, for example, in that situation? Defensively, you've just got to be so resolute that those gaps don't appear. They can hang their hat on the Tom O'Toole thing. They have to recognise that Toulouse played for 70 minutes last week with 14 men. They had to do it for 15 minutes. And I agree with you. I was watching the game. Toulouse, it was almost reckless abandon. Some of the offloads they were doing. I mean, the DuPont pop 5 yards from his own line when they took that quick line out with Ramos. You're wondering, does he think this is an exhibition game? Are they opening the stadium today, or what is he doing?
Yeah.
But yes, they have this genius. I mean, the fact DuPont, he's not quite where he was. He must be exhausted or something. He's not playing at the level that we know he's capable of. But yet, in every game, he produces moments of brilliance that are the difference between winning and losing. I mean, they shifted into 10 for the last, I think Intermac went into the centre. And he was brilliant. I mean, he scored that try with 5 minutes to go. But Ulster have been down this road so many times before. And I think Ulster have made massive strides this year. Yeah. That backline, again, I thought Fiona's right. McElroy, the try, he'd no right to score the crossfield kick one. I mean, he just plucks it out of the air. He's imbalanced. He pulls it down with one hand, scored. I thought James Hume in the centre was outstanding. And in fact, you could almost sense the Toulouse fellas looking at him saying, who in the name of God is this fella? Yeah. Like they wouldn't recognise he has played for Ireland, came off the bench in the Six Nations. But I can tell you, in another time, Ugo Mola, the coach, would be looking at him and say, he's a guy who could add something to Toulouse. Toulouse in midfield at the moment, I know they have a couple of injuries. They're just lacking a little bit of balance there. So they're not quite at the level they were at last year. They're under pressure to get into that top six position or to consolidate that in the French league. So it'd be interesting to watch what they're going to do over the next 2 weeks. Big 2 weeks in the top 14. I think personally they'll be thrilled that they're not going back to Thomond Park as opposed to the Aviva Stadium. But just before we go on to that, Ulster, they should have won it. And then they'd have had Munster in Ravenhill, and you'd have to say on the balance of the way that both teams are playing, you'd have to favour Ulster to win that, get into a semi-final.
And Donal, Dan McFarlane has spoken about this season. He said, and I remember this line specifically because it stood out to me. He said, "We're a terrible team when we're favourites to win." He said, like, we're a terrible side for getting over the line when we were expected to get over the line in big games. And that must be, we talked about Munster's stand up and fight and their resilience, I guess, over the last couple of legs. It must be very frustrating for a coach when he has everything else seemingly right, and that's the link that's missing.
Yeah, look, it's the only link that's missing there, because they have improved. Like we would have been critical of their front five, for example, in the past number of years. That was the missing hand. No, Ian Henderson is back to his best. Alan O'Connor, to be fair, is a kind of an unsung hero for them when you consider that Kieran Treadwell was coming off the bench. He got 2 caps off the bench in the last 2 Six Nations games, but he's not starting for Ulster. So all of a sudden, they have a bit of depth, and you have Sam Carter, a Wallaby, behind those 3. I think their scrum has improved. Marty Moore looks a bit fitter than he has been, and that has helped their scrum. So from that point of view, once you get that platform, and then Vermeulen has been outstanding, and you can see the influence that he has on the likes of Nick Timoney. Young Marcus Ray has been selected ahead of Jordy Murphy, so being able to bring Jordy Murphy in, they now have that strength and depth that they didn't have. And that young backline is, with Balakoon, Lowry, McElroy, Hume. And I think, to be fair, McCluskey is back to where he was 2 or 3 years ago. And again, Fiona's right. Billy Burns probably had one of his best games. So, the ingredients are there. It must be sickening for them. But no different to Munster. Now, Munster are still in Europe. But if you're Ulster now, you've got to put every single ounce into winning the URC.
Yeah, 100%. Now, look, you mentioned the war here, Donal, and we need to put our cards on the table. Not a lot of people notice, but I notice. I guess you and I have toured quite a way. You're a massive Ed Sheeran fan. You have the Ed Sheeran pajamas. You love all his music, all his albums up on the wall, posters and everything. Nonetheless, Donal, can you separate yourself here, despite the fact he's playing at Thomond Park and your front row seats? like, can you understand the decision by the Munster Council and the Munster branch to take that concert when they did, with, I guess, the question marks over whether Munster would A, get to a quarterfinal, B, would it be a home quarterfinal if they did, and C, the dates around it? Can you understand how this situation has arisen?
Can I just say, the only time I've ever heard Ed Sheeran songs are in a karaoke bar, having to listen to you in Japan and New Zealand. Apart from that, I don't know what he sings. Okay? So...
Stop telling secrets out of shop there, will you? For God's sake.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, you anyway, I won't comment on your voice, but to be fair to Munster, I think, look, this was the Ed Sheeran thing came up a long time ago. And this was an opportunity to make serious money. Financially, Munster, look, it's been a horrible time for professional sport. Rugby hasn't been spared by the impact of the pandemic. Munster, more than the other provinces, are under serious financial difficulty due to the redevelopment of Thomond Park. That's a kind of a noose over their neck now. And to be fair, the RFU have changed the repayment schedule on it. They've given them sort of holiday payments. But it's a noose over their neck, and it's something that they've had to address. It is impacting on their capacity to sign players. So it is something that has to be addressed. Now, you can argue, they should have known that quarter-final time in Europe is around May. But I think the opportunity to get these concerts came up well over 12 months ago. So from that point of view, I think they had to go for it. I mean, we're talking about Toulouse and Ulster. Had Toulouse not got that try at the death, then Munster would be travelling to Ravenhill and we wouldn't be talking about it. Look, it's the same argument is going on here in Cork, because obviously the hurlers and footballers are being discommoded by the fact that Páirc Uí Chaoimh is out of commission for a couple of weeks after the concerts there. It's a fact of life. It's unfortunate. But I think what has magnified it more is the fact that for the first time in almost 3 years, Thomond Park was back to what we knew and love and what makes days there so special. You got a taste of that for the first time in 3 years, and you felt, oh God, like if ever you needed that, now it's Toulouse coming to town. It's unfortunate, but look, I can understand the thinking of Munster at the time.
What do you think, Fiona?
Yeah, I agree. I think, they needed money. There was people being let off. I think it was 2 years ago they said that they agreed to do this. I think he came out and said that. My big thing is plan B. Why isn't there a plan B in place? Like, I know like it's that Cork concerts are down in Cork as well, but Páirc Uí Rinn, I'll throw it out there. Why is plan B the Aviva? Do you know what I mean? There needs to be something else. If it isn't, if we're looking at a big capacity and it can't be Thomond Park and something's gone wrong, there has to be somewhere else. The Aviva is very far away. It's not essentially a home game. I don't think I watched the Saracens game up there before, and you don't feel like it's a home game. So it will interfere with how, as much as Van Grant says, it will interfere in the game because it's not the same atmosphere. The players love that. They soak that up. But look, it is what it is. You just have to get on with it. But I would be wondering why there isn't somewhere else looked at.
Yeah, well, there is. Sorry, Hugh, on that. There is. It's the perfect storm, really. I mean, Munster, they've done feasibility studies on playing the game, and playing games, big games in Páirc Uí Chaoimh. And, they've done it on the basis of a 30,000, 35,000, 45,000 crowd. And it's very feasible. I know from my own context, the Cork County Board, who are also desperate, obviously, to pay the debt on the new Páirc Uí Chaoimh. They're crying out for Munster to play in Páirc Uí Chaoimh. But again, it's just unfortunate that this has come up at a time. The championship, the All-Ireland series, as we know, it's starting way earlier than it would have in times past. That's the first thing. The second thing is because of their two concerts, not alone is Páirc Uí Chaoimh ruled out for the quarter-final, I think it could be ruled out for the semi-final. Like the one that will really annoy me is if Munster beat Toulouse and Leinster make the semi-final. Munster are the higher ranked team and therefore entitled to host the semi-final. Where is it going to be? The Aviva. I mean, that is a game. Had that been in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, 45,000 people, I think it would be riveting. I also know that the branch, they looked at the possibility of Fitzgerald Stadium in Killarney. They looked at Semple Stadium in Thurles, but there's
Temple
issues
Hill.
there. No, Temple Hill it was unavailable.
It's up to you. It's up to you. Would be in Temple Hill anyway. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, we have tag rugby now 5 nights a week, so I can't cope with that. No, I think it comes back. Killarney and Tipperary comes back to the corporate side of it. The facilities aren't quite there for the corporate side of what you'd be looking for a European semi-final. But look, down the road, this is going to happen. Thomond Park is the home of Munster Rugby, but for those games, quarterfinals, semi-finals, and indeed, I think the Christmas, if Munster want to generate money, Munster, Leinster, Stephen's Day, they have to give one of those to Páirc Uí Chaoimh. I guarantee you get a 45,000 sellout crowd. Look at the money you'd make out of that. I've always said over the years, that Munster-Leinster fixture in Pro 14 or URC as it is now, being shifted to the Aviva. The extra money that Leinster were able to generate from that has been a major factor in them being able to go on, build the facilities that they have, build the development structures they have around the province, these development hubs that they have all around Leinster. So, look, the financial side of it is important, but it's just a pity, the perfect storm. I think Toulouse playing Munster and Páirc Uí Chaoimh would have been fantastic.
Neil, there seems to be a good bit of anger among Munster fans, some Munster fans. There are some who are quite, pragmatic about it and accept what has happened, but there's an awful lot of anger as well at this match. A, is not in Thomond Park, B, not in Munster and has to go to the Aviva.
Yeah, I think it's more a frustration with the entire situation. I think there's a lot of understanding of how they've ended up in the situation rather than people kind of angry with Munster for doing this. I kind of go along with what Fiona and Donal were saying there, where obviously I think that they have to be questioned for it. They have to be kind of grilled on how it's come to this point. But I would probably be leaning on the side of there were 2 years of incredible uncertainty with finances. There were a lot of people laid off. Even like a lot of staff of Munster Rugby laid off, not just kind of people that they couldn't sign or things like that. So I think it's understandable that they took the chance of booking a concert like that for that weekend. having said all that, if it was to happen next year or the year after where there was a similar clash, I think that would be completely unacceptable. I think this as a one-off, having to take that chance was okay. Like Donal was saying, it's that perfect storm of, the fact that I think is it something to do with the stage that Ed Sheeran has where it's out in the middle of the pitch or something that's
what it is. Yeah.
The delay with the pitches being playable again for a couple of weeks after. That's probably just making it even worse. And by the way, has one person ever caused more chaos on the Munster sporting calendar than Ed Sheeran?
Donal, you might next week just report back and let us know if Ed Sheeran being in the centre like that, if that helps the acoustics or not, or what your view is, or you prefer if he just sitting in the front as normal. Listen, Neil, do we have any idea when Rowntree's backroom team might be named? We're hearing that it could be in the next couple of weeks. I know Mike Prendergast has long been linked with a return home. Maybe Dennis Leamy's name has been in the mix as well. Do we have any timeline on when he's likely to name his backroom team, do you think? Or
nothing definite. Yeah. He was speaking on the I think it was the rugby pod with Jim Hamilton, I think, in the last week or so, and he kind of suggested that it's in the next couple of weeks. It's not something that they're not just starting the process now of trying to recruit those people, because as Rowntree pointed out last week as well, that when he was interviewing for the job over the past couple of months, he had to go there with a plan. He had to go there with suggestions of names of people he'd sounded out that this is the backroom team that I would try put together. So I think he said he's had those kind of initial conversations with people about coming on board, and now it's actually just a case of signing them up and getting them involved. Okay,
all right. Last topic for discussion then, Fiona, and we won't go too big on this. I put it to you, and I don't want to be too dismissive here, right? But I'm very conscious of the amount of overhaul in the squad in the last couple of weeks, the amount of sevens players that were starting backline players in the 3 games before now in the Women's Six Nations that are gone. And the fact that England are monstrous. If Ireland can keep England within 40 points, and I'm not being dismissive here of Sunday, I think that's a fantastic result.
I agree with you. I think obviously injuries as well. Sam Monaghan is going to be a huge loss on how she's played. Sene going in, it seems the way Greg's talking as well, that Sene might go straight into that starting lineup, which is I think she's a fantastic player, but why wasn't Sene training with him the whole time if that was the case? Do you know what I mean? Like, so they are going in. He wants experienced players in there. I think it's going to be one of his hardest game to date, obviously, but especially with the exodus of the sevens back line. I mean, there's people called up into camp. They're probably only getting 2 sessions and they could be thrown into a start.
And thrown in against England. You look at the players that England have, and not to be dismissive, but their household names, Scarlett, Jess Breach, like Poppy Cleal. Like, you're just talking about the best of women's rugby in one team. And this could be serious scar tissue here for some players if he doesn't manage the situation. I can understand for this game why he's bringing the likes of Sene back, because you do not want to throw a 19, 20-year-old Fiona in against this English team to be, eaten up and spat out.
Yeah, well, exactly. I agree with it. I'm just saying maybe she should have been in there getting the calls because he's a new coach in there. So why not have her in there as an older player kind of around the system? That look, it's going to be how could you put this lightly? It's going to be very physical. It's going to be England are going to be exceptionally dominant. They still haven't hit their full gear. I've been watching them. They've been playing really well in patches. They're not even happy with how they're playing, and they're hammering teams by 30, 40 points. So it's going to be tough going over to England. They're all trying to make a World Cup squad. He's rotating, but anyone he rotates with is just as good, high caps with him. So I'm worried for this squad, but I'm sure he knows they've been told what they're going into, and they'll just concentrate in their own game, which is all they can do. And if they can put in a performance defensively, I think that's a good start for them.
If anyone's listening to this and they fancy an old bet here or there, a present company excluded, of course, the greatest sure thing in the history of sport this year is going to be England to win the Women's World Cup. They're going to do it at an absolute counter. They won't be touched. I think for Greg McWilliams, Neil, if you're looking at the squad, the only way he can break this down and kind of get something out of the match is to give them maybe a couple of soft goals around the game, like, right, we want to win all of our own lineouts, or, we don't want to miss more than 25% of our tackles. Break it down in that regard so that they have something to focus on rather than the overall picture of the game, which we know they just cannot win.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Kind of just break it down to specific markers to hit, even in a post-match review, and try not to, as difficult as it's going to be, try not to actually think about the scoreline, because he was pretty honest yesterday at his on his media duties, saying England are by some distance the best team in the world. he was saying, even people are talking about how it's a shootout between England and France in the Six Nations. Yeah. He was saying England are probably 20 points better off than France at the moment. They've scored just shy of 200 points across 3 games. So you're talking 60 plus on average a game. They've conceded 10 in 3 games. Like, it's not realistic for Ireland to go there saying, you know, we're going out to win this game. As much as you might want to do it, you have to be realistic about it and aim for the markers. I thought it was a good point that Fiona made there about Sene Neopu, that it probably from the start of this tournament, it seemed likely that, you know, we were going to be losing so many of these players for the latter half of the tournament, and that it would have been fairly likely that Sene would have been coming in anyway, and you would have needed an experienced player like her. Then why hasn't she been involved, just even to have around the squad in training, to be able to slot straight back in? Because it seems pretty certain she's going to be in the starting team this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, best of luck. Obviously, it looks like an absolutely massive task. Right, Friday night, live action in the URC. It's Ulster against Munster. The teams will be named tomorrow, Thursday. So hopefully we get full strength teams. Don't I go back to reading Moss Finn's diary, beating the All Blacks. I knew feck all about it. And sure, look, we'll have a chat maybe on Friday at the match. What about that?
No bother. As long as you don't sing Ed Sheeran on the way up the card.
I promise, no Ed Sheeran. I promise you'll have enough of that on Saturday night in Brook Park. Right, listen, thanks very much to Neil, to Donal, and to Fiona. Thanks for listening. We're back next week. Enjoy the weekend.
The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.